Hey everybody, I'm Jay Scherr with Jay Scherr Business Consulting. We help entrepreneurs, business owners, and other leaders maximize their potential, build rock-solid foundations for their businesses, and create more freedom in their lives. And you've joined Business Minds Coffee Chat. Lao Tzu is attributed to the quote, "Knowing others is intelligence, knowing yourself is true wisdom." Well, on today's episode, we're going to talk about knowing oneself, your inner core, how to cultivate and nurture the 5 core energies, the inner and outer approach to success, transcendence, and more. My guest is a husband and father, an award-winning adjunct professor of business at Columbia Business School, founder and CEO of Mentora Institute, author of the book Inner Mastery, Outer Impact, and host of the podcast Intersections. With a PhD in management science from MIT and a lifelong study of the world's mystic traditions, his mission is to discover, codify, and teach the laws of success in life and leadership. His class on personal leadership and success at Columbia has for many years been the most popular MBA leadership elective. His work has been covered by leading media outlets, including Harvard Business Review, Fortune, Forbes, Wall Street Journal, and many others. Please welcome the man who's helping all of us activate our inner core so we can live a life well lived, Hitendra Wadhwa. Hitendra, it is so great to see you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, my pleasure, Jay. Thank you for having me, and thank you for that very generous introduction.
Absolutely. It is my pleasure, and I am thrilled to welcome you today, and I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. So let's dive right in. Hitendra, I thought a good starting point for us would be for you to share with all of us what your favorite thing is about yourself and why.
That's a beautiful question. I think my favorite thing about myself is to see myself as a mystery. To see myself as yet not even fully discovered by my conscious self. To recognize that there are capacities within me, there is a richness of lived history, there is a future that is unfolding where there can be incredibly special discoveries that I'm able to form about the level of love, the level of purpose, the level of joy, the level of wisdom that I innately have access to. And that while I may have partially been able to activate and discover and utilize, there's just so much more that still lies out there for me to, over time, uncover, cultivate, and express in life.
Oh, that is so good. So let's talk about that lived history a bit. If we can go back to give our audience some context around your own personal history, your own personal journey, and really what brought you to this particular point in time in our conversation. So in researching you, you have a very rich history, and I would love it if you would maybe share a bit of a thumbnail sketch of your backstory. Let's go back to your time in India, some early life experiences that you had that shaped who you are, and then we'll pull the timeline forward a bit.
Sure, happy to. I, as you mentioned, grew up in India, and from a very early age, I had a strong pull towards probing behind the surface of things to the harder questions in life. What happens after death, and where did I actually truly come from? Did I just originate as at some point a little fetus and ultimately a baby out of my mother's womb, or did I have an existence prior to that? And that star, I feel it's speaking to me when I look out at it on a dark, starry night. And these people in the world, I feel something for them, as though they're my family, even though apparently I'm being told that it's just these people who are my family. And so these kinds of questions. And I found an avenue through which to pursue and explore these questions, which were the mystical kind of explorations that saints and prophets and other great truth seekers across time and across the great faiths have pursued. My father's bookshelf was a very rich access point for me on this, because he had deep similar curiosities. And then around the age of 10, I ended up getting swept up in the work of Yogananda, who's a founding father of yoga in the West. Came here in 1920 at the age of 27, set up an international order, anticipating the future growing hunger in the West for these kinds of deeper truths, and seeing the need for bringing these kinds of inner science of self-discovery that yoga is a path for. So he set up an organization called Self-Realization Fellowship. So the lessons, the teachings, the insights and practices from that organization have been very much the foundation stone for me in my life. That said, I had this outer pull, wanting to succeed and achieve and experience and go on an adventuresome journey in life. And that part of me took me down a path of being interested in psychology and ultimately mathematics as my major in college. Then I come to the United States after college for my next big adventure, going to graduate school, ultimately getting a PhD in business analytics, working in management consulting for a while, doing a startup in Silicon Valley. And by now I'm in my early to mid 30s. And I'm starting to feel very rich and blessed from the outside, but a little bit dry in spirit on the inside. And the reason in part was that I wasn't really nurturing, in a sense, my inner life as much as I had wanted to early on in my life. I knew about these practices around Kriya Yoga, for example, which is a very deep form of getting in touch with prana or life force within you that Yogananda had taught. But I hadn't made it a regular practice, in my life. I'd always said, in the future, once I'm done with all of these things that are keeping me busy. And now in my early to mid 30s, and I'm feeling like, wow, Hitendra, your teens have flown by, your 20s have flown by. What are you doing? You haven't truly pursued the kind of deep self-discovery work you wanted to. And so I paused a little bit, slowed life down, came to Columbia University, New York, and started to teach. And in doing so, created some space. And in that space, I just anchored myself in some of these deeper inner spiritual search, kind of practices. And it's been my greatest blessing ever since to have had that. And as it started to take root, from the inside, I felt a hunger to want to bring the spiritual and material, aspects of life, the inner and the outer, purpose and in profit, so to say. I wanted to bring them together into one whole self, rather than just have these two be parallel tracks that I'm taking in life. And so that led me to experiment with and evolve and ultimately, establish this class on personal leadership and success at Columbia. So that became a tremendous sort of boon for me to have a way to sort of talk about things that, I felt I'd experiment with and evolved in my life, but I'd also learned from some of the latest science were actually quite apt and important, in work and life. And I'm grateful to Columbia and the students for having given me that permission to bring this out. And, I guess the rest is in some ways for me history. It's been the last 15 years now. And, I'm just very, very grateful.
Absolutely. Well, that is obviously so impactful. And I want to go back to something that you said that goes back to your youth and the bookshelf that your father had. So you shared a similar interest in certain topics. And on this bookshelf, were there certain books that you were primarily drawn to? Was it a curiosity of all different spiritual and mystic teachings? And then the second part of that, were you and your father having conversations around these topics at the same time that you were on this early exploration?
Yeah, it's a great line of questioning, Jay. Yeah, I mean, like the books there, for instance, some of these would be the lives of saints. Um, so, just kind of reading about saints from different world traditions. Saint Augustine going through his, dark night of the soul and emerging a lot more illuminated and whole, but after having, wallowed in a lot of sort of, just like earthly craziness until he finally, realized his true purpose. Or Saint Francis of Assisi or Rumi, one of the very beautiful Sufi, leaders, saints, influences, beautiful poet as well. And then in the Indian traditions, Ramakrishna, it's quite a mouthful for those of us who are not familiar with Indian names. Ramakrishna, an amazing saint from the late 1800s, early 1900s, who for a period of time was deeply devoted to Islam and used that to get himself to a really high place. For a period of time, took to Christianity and followed Jesus' teaching and got himself to a really high place. But fundamentally was a Hindu, coming from the Hindu Indian, faith, but a faith that celebrates the presence of multiple paths up the mountaintop, and demonstrating that, look, if I say very devoted to the pure teachings of Jesus or to the pure teachings of Muhammad as I see them, I can get myself to a state of ecstatic, communion with God. And I can go back then to my own faith too and do the same. So he was a key influence as well. And then, of course, Yogananda and everything that I could learn from a modern day, English speaking and writing authority, on the scriptures. So these were examples. My father and I, absolutely. We would have conversations about the morality of capital punishment, for example. I would come up with these puzzles and these questions in my life. Well, if I'm a judge and I'm meant to actually enact the law and judge on the basis of the law, and at the same time, fundamentally, I believe, like Gandhi, that non-violence should be our creed, and then if the law says you have to sentence this person to a death penalty, would I be able to do that? And the conclusion I reached, by the way, on some of these questions is that the intellect can go a little bit sort of nuts, on us at times, and can pose, all kinds of conundrums. But I think if we are in tune, if we are seeking to feel a sense of communion with the love and the wisdom that is present in the universe, then we will only be put into situations where the choices we are meant to make are just what is appropriate for us in that moment, just what we will have enough of wisdom and guidance for to make the right call for in the moment. So rather than have rigid prescriptions about what's right or wrong, which is what we have to do just as an approximation in society to be able to, allow for there to be some sort of, guidelines on the basis of which we can operate. The conclusion I reached is that, the mystics were seeking to just have one piece of guidance, which is stay in tune, put the ego aside, put attachments, aside, live a life of deep devotion and selfless attunement. And when you do, then in every moment, the situations that you will be thrust into are ones that you will have the right guidance coming to you from the clarity of your own inner voice.
So speaking of ego and attachment, so you mentioned that it was in the early to mid 30s that you came to a place where you realized that you needed to get back to some of these early principles and going back to learning or going within. And what was there a particular situation, a particular catalyst, something that you can point to that brought you to that place of realization? I mean, you're living a by many people's definition, a life of success at this point, and talk about what changed, why that change was necessary, and how you processed ego and attachment at that stage in life versus or compared to today. I know that's a mouthful, so we can break that down, but start with what was the catalyst that led you to decide to make this life change?
For many of us, these catalysts can be moments of crisis where something is rudely taken away from us, or we wake up to a certain gross evil, or something that just disenchants us, a little bit, or shakes us up or something. I'm very grateful that I've had the smoothest of rides in life. I am just so blessed with everything, whether it's health or loving relationships or just very happy, positive engagement with the world. So I cannot claim to have had my catalytic moment come from any of these kinds of moments of trauma or loss or etc. For me, the catalyst was more coming from the other end of the human experience spectrum, which is joy, ecstasy, wonderment, a sense of deep sort of possibilities about what my true nature might be and could be, and ways through which to accelerate and attune myself to deeper truths and to more growth than I could ever achieve purely in physically lived human life by itself. And those to me came early in my life when I was just 10, 12, 14, 15 years old, and I would see and experience sometimes this great sense of attunement with nature, great sense of attunement with just core spirit, my spirit, the spirit in the universe, a sense of just timeless, no birth, no death, kind of a sensing of my consciousness, of my true nature that was beyond just the finite, home that a human body gives me for some 30, 40, 50, 80, 90, 100 years. And so in my early to mid 30s, what I was starting to realize that, Hitendra, you made life too complicated. It was relatively simple back there in your teens, and there were these higher, purer aspirations you had, and you weren't caught up in the razzle-dazzle. And while it's interesting, to eat delicious food, have a greater sense of accomplishment and power and, all the enjoyment that the world can give you on the outside, there is something missing, on the inside, which you used to get as a high in those little kind of quiet walks, in the middle of the night that you just take on the, roof of your home, under a starry night, or, just doing a little bit of prayer or meditation or chanting, the way it opened the heart and things like that. And so to me, the catalytic sort of moment was a recognition that I am now in my 30s. I'm going to be soon in my 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, who knows, and I'm then going to be looking back at life and I'm feeling like, wow, what the hell? You never allowed yourself to get to an even higher place with regard to the capacity to cultivate, higher consciousness. And the promise was there. It from the teachings, from yoga, etc., that you picked up, but somehow you're just not nurturing it, you're not developing it. And you want to get to that place where, it's just so much more enduring, permanent, pure, attuned, coming from within than you're giving yourself the chance to do. So then I was at a retreat, for a few days. I used to go periodically to these spiritual retreats, and they would help me get to my true nature, to my core. And at one of those, in that period in my early 30s, when I just wrapped up my startup in Silicon Valley, which had gone really well for a while, and then I'd also crashed and burned, after that. When it had crashed and burned, and I saw this opening in my professional life, this new sort of little period of time in between that and whatever I was going to do to reinvent myself, I started to more actively go, to this retreat. And it was one of Yogananda's ashrams in India. And it was in one of those periods where I started to have this voice, rise from within me saying, Hitendra, you're going to let your 30s, 40s, 50s just go by, just like you let your 20s and teens go by. So do something about it. And for that, you have to anchor yourself in a daily discipline, in a daily practice. You've got this, teaching of Kriya Yoga that you've never taken, you've never fully consummated, you've never really initiated yourself in it because you've always been in fear that you won't be able to live to the commitment of twice daily kind of practice that Yogananda was asking, people to do if they were going to take this on. And why don't you take it on? And so far you haven't done it because you're living as though like everything else needs to happen first and this can wait. But what if you reversed it and you said, everything else can wait, but this must happen first? What if you approach it that way? That was where non-attachment had to come in, because I had to allow myself to realize that, listen, you start doing the right things, right things in concert with your soul nature, in concert with the true purpose of life, which is to advance your realization towards the divine. You start to do that, and then naturally so, the right opportunities, the right openings of doors, the right growth, the right understanding, the right choices, all of that will start to flow to you. Why don't you think of it that way rather than just the linear step by step? Okay, I've got to achieve that goal. Let's break into these 7 steps and let's just go. What if like the first step in that is surrender, attunement, cultivation of that kind of divine capacity within us, and then yes, go after the goal setting and go after the goal pursuit, knowing fully well that the time and investment you're making in that sort of inner journey is only going to pay off in spades, on the outside over time.
Well, this is so interesting, and I find that path that you just described a moment ago, where we go, we're very goal oriented, we're going to accomplish this, and that's going to take us to this, and then to this, and it seems like it's always chasing that next thing, thinking that at some point we're going to arrive, right? We're going to have achieved the greatness that we have visualized for ourselves, whatever that happens to be. But the reality is, based on my experience and those that I've worked with, is that goalpost continues to move. So we can look throughout our lives and see examples of where we wanted something, we set a goal, we accomplished that thing, whatever it is, and then that feeling of accomplishment lasts for such a short period of time, and then we're automatically on to the next thing or chasing the next thing. So I think it's really interesting that you reached this place where you made a conscious decision to flip the script. And you mentioned the words crash and burn. So can you give us maybe a bit of context around what happened after you either sold the business or the business wrapped up, whatever the case was? What happened at that point in your life? Then you go to this ashram in India.
I speak about this a little bit in my book, Inner Mastery, Outer Impact, at the very beginning of this chapter on living with wisdom, about how I was doing the startup in Silicon Valley in the Web 1.0 days, many ways living the entrepreneur's dream, having raised 10 million in venture capital and been the founding CEO of my company. We were going to revolutionize the way digital marketing was done in those very early days of the internet. And we achieved, a modicum of success. We had, a couple of big banks as our clients and had some super talented people on our team and had all these aspirations. And then, for those of us who have enough gray hair to remember, we had the telecom bubble burst and then the internet bubble burst in late 2001 and then 2002. And suddenly it was very hard to raise the next tranche of venture capital, and we hadn't made enough money to be cash flow positive. And I was really coming out of that experience, just kind of like kicking and screaming, because I really wanted to preserve this was like my own child, my startup. And I couldn't, I had to let it go and allow the venture capitalists who were supporting us to roll it into another of their portfolio companies, and I lost control. And so that was the crash and burn. And, in that moment, I was so wanting to keep it, in my hands and yet the door was slammed shut on me. And now I look back and I feel like, wow, that was the greatest blessing. Because what if I'd just been like marginally successful, or maybe even a lot successful? I might be rolling in a lot of sort of the Silicon Valley kind of, lucre of like, gold and, changing apparently 1 billion people's lives in some kind of way based on my marketing technology out there, which I respect. I respect the people who are doing that kind of really, really remarkable work. But it may have kept me so busy and so distracted that I would not have made the space and time to listen to the yearnings and whispers of my soul, and the fact that, I was in that moment, just like required basically by an act of nature with everything that was happening with the internet and this me losing control. I was just required to basically shut down that path for myself and open myself up to new vistas. That just allowed me to create that space. And when that space was created, yes, something beautiful emerged with my next step in my professional journey, with my role at Columbia Business School, but also what else happened is that I developed both the clarity and the courage to look within and make some important calls for myself.
That is phenomenal. So let's go to Columbia University, and you develop this class, this course, and it becomes the one of the top courses, one of the top electives for MBA students. I'm curious, as I was researching you and looking at this course, what was the process like for you creating it and then presenting it? Was there any? Well, I don't want to make any assumptions. Just walk us through what that was like, actually creating it, presenting it, and then that course being accepted as part of the curriculum.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate, Jay, your line of inquiry. You are taking me down very, critical chapters of my professional journey, and this is a good one for me just to even reflect on for myself. I hope it's of some service and value to our listeners here. So
I know it will be.
Yeah. So what happened is that when I first started to teach at Columbia, I was teaching classes on marketing and strategy, which were the domains that I had pursued professionally at that time. And it was rewarding, it was stimulating, but mostly it was giving me also a lot of time to learn the art and craft of being an effective business school professor. I'd been on the receiving end of it in the past, by being a student in a business school class, but now I was, in the delivery end of it. And B, it was giving me the space and time for that deeper incubation of all these things on the inside. Once I got to that point where I felt like, okay, Hitendra, you know how to sort of hit a couple of these balls out of the park in terms of engaging with an audience in a business school classroom and taking them through a meaningful learning journey and, getting high energy and engagement in the class and ultimately, culminating in some kind of end of course moments where people feel really good about the semester. So you learn to kind of play that game. And I taught a number of different courses by then. So I'd sort of seen my capacity to replicate that, across multiple topics. So at that point, this inner stirring is starting to get more and more clarified. And I want to create a class like this, which is about how do you lead yourself? How do you engage in a much more purposeful and wiser approach to relationships and to life and to forging, choices for yourself and showing up in the workplace in a way that infuses joy and a sense of deep connection and heroic commitment to some noble purpose and all of that, right? So, okay, so these are the kind of things I want to talk about. How do I do that? There was no class like that, at Columbia or pretty much in most business schools back then. There were a couple of other pioneering professors. There used to be at Columbia someone called Dr. Sri Kumar Rao. He had started something, quite kindred, in spirit in past years, and he was, phasing out his work in time and that class here at that time. So I had him to look up and say, oh, okay, some things like this have had at least some experimentation here, but there was very little of that going on. So I ended up first saying, like, I got to establish cred here. I need some credibility, and so I asked myself, what's the best way to do that? And I said, I think it's going to be two things. One is, let's study the most illuminated and honored lives in human history. And I said, I've got to study those that are in the public arena, in the messy milieu of life, because just by studying an artist or a scientist, that may not give enough sort of heft to my arguments in a business school context, because these people will say, well, they were doing very pure things, but our world is very messy and ego-driven and all that. So then I picked not just business leaders, but, at times social movement leaders, change makers, political leaders, Mandela and Gandhi and Eleanor Roosevelt, even a Mother Teresa, but also Steve Jobs and a Warren Buffett. And then the other thing I did was to tap into science. Obviously, we all have a lot of respect for the rigor and fact base and objectivity that science brings. And in the last 20 years, there has been an explosion of insight about the human condition from a range of different scientific disciplines like psychology and neuroscience and psychotherapy and others. So I started to spend time in these disciplines, meet with some of their preeminent voices in modern times, attend the evolution of psychotherapy, once every 5 year kind of pilgrimage spot, for all therapists who want to stay on top of their discipline. And by collecting and aggregating and connecting and learning and conversing, with these experts, I was able to build a curriculum that stood on those two pillars. What are the lived examples of people and their stories and the transformational things that they've done and the moments they've gone through and the discipline and practice of character and leadership that they've put together. And then what is the science of human nature telling us about what it takes to, build trust and manage conflict and master your own, emotions and live more and operate more in a purpose-driven way? What are the benefits of that? What is the essence of that? How do you live that, right? And of course, that's the journey that I've then since codified in Inner Mastery, Outer Impact, my book as well. So, yeah.
Amazing. And as you built the curriculum for this, was it received by Columbia immediately? Was it embraced by the university? And then how long did it take for this course to just become as significant as it did in terms of being a number one class, a number one elective for MBA students? I mean, that's amazing.
Well, thank you. It's funny, when I walked through the portals of Columbia, I remember just having this deep pull. Hitendra, you will create something that will have broad appeal and that will touch people at a much deeper level, There would be this intuitive pull that would come to me. And this was years before, this class ever existed. And so in some ways, this class was an outcome of this kind of intuitive pull, towards something kind of like maybe my destiny or something. You're right. Initially it wasn't necessarily that smooth a ride. The school, justifiably so, wanted to see clarity and evidence about what role this might have in an MBA curriculum. There weren't, like I was saying, a lot of precedents around at that time. Today it would be much easier, I think, to make the case because we are just in a different, place in business and, humanity with a much greater appreciation about the role of compassion and empathy and purpose and, creating an inspired workplace and the role of mental health and leadership being not just about the outer life, but the inner life of the organization. So these things are getting a lot more currency today, but at that time, these were kind of fresher and newer. And so I had to lay the evidence out in front of my faculty peers, invite them to be scrutinizing and asking and ultimately making themselves comfortable that what Hitendra is doing is actually accelerating the transfer of knowledge from the scientific arena in psychology and psychotherapy and all that into a leadership curriculum. And so that's something we should respect and open ourselves up for. We started to teach it in one of our programs and then moved it to another of our programs after about 1.5 to 2 years. And so it took a while. I had to build new relationships within the business schools with the faculty who were doing more leadership, work versus more marketing and strategy, like I'd done in the past. And there was a period when I looked at it as a challenging and maybe at times even a little bit like less hopeful, prospect and possibility. But I just feel so grateful to the Institute, Columbia, in having gradually opened itself up and shared me and supported me and given me the platform. With the students, it ended up having a very early resonance very quickly because I think it was filling an untapped gap and hole, and a hunger that they were experiencing, which they didn't have any language, through which to really express that. So I found the going much easier with them. That said, it hasn't always been the case. Over the course of its 15-year history, I have sought to keep about 80% of it rock solid, based on the success or what has worked in the last semester or the last year. But I've sought to constantly evolve it and take 20% of the time in class and the curriculum and assignments and all of that and experiment with new, fresh, possibilities and thinking and research and themes and ideas. And that has served me really well, because where it is today as a class, and I think it served the students really well, because where it is today as a class is much beyond where it was 15 years ago. I was just starting on that journey. I had some of that 2 years of jump start through all the research I was doing with science and studying the great achievers in human history. But still, putting it into a class form and, putting the right framework around it and all of that, I was just starting. And so the evolution to me has been very rewarding. And I can look back now and smile at like, Hitendra, what were you thinking when you were presenting this that way or that way? It is so much more effective to do it this way. I'm grateful to the students having allowed me that 20% of leeway to keep bringing in edgy new possibilities, to the class, and some of which flopped and some of which worked really well. And so they have been my best teachers, their reactions, their actions, the sustainability with which they have engaged in some of these ideas in the years ahead. And I learn about it through our alumni reunions where they come back and chat with me or somebody sends me an email. And so, the experience of doing it right, doing it not so right, and learning from that has allowed me to come to a place today where definitely I'm benefiting now from whatever it is that I received from the learnings and insights from the experts, but also a lot of the experience of actually doing it and having, at this point, 4,000 or 5,000 of these students being in some ways my guides.
It really is truly amazing. And what I love is that, you mentioned that you felt this pull, right? That this was something that you were meant to do, and that even through the challenging times, even when there was maybe doubt or maybe it wasn't being received to the degree that you maybe wanted it to be at an early stage, that you made a decision that this is something that I'm going to see through. It meant that much to you. You were so purpose-driven in being able to bring this to life, and the impact that it's had on so many students as a result, and the impact obviously on the university as a whole. And also another thing that I really appreciate about this part of your story is that you understand that we're always in a state of change, that something that you created 15 years ago had an impact at that time, and part of it, obviously a big part of it still does today, but we also realize that we're always changing, and we need to look at how we can evolve and continue to bring great value as we learn more, as we're listening more, as the people around us are growing and changing as well. And the fact that you were in tune to that you weren't so locked into and married so deeply to what you had created that you weren't willing to make a change. You did. You were flexible enough, and look at what that's been able to do and how that continues to grow and impact. I really think that's phenomenal, and there's a lesson there for all of us that we can learn as well about evolution, about change, about ideating, about listening to your audience, about listening to your clients as an example, and paying attention to the conversations that are taking place. Don't be afraid to get pushback on your ideas, and don't think that your idea is always the best idea. So be open to listening and learning from others.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, that you are celebrating and highlighting that evolutionary change, aspect of it. And it reminds me of a thought that has really been helpful for me. I know this may sound a little bit, mystical, but for those of us who seek to find meaning, in everything, this might be of some service. So Yogananda, he said, ultimately the world is this dance between like spirit and nature. So nature is the material world that has emerged from spirit. And he says spirit is infinite. Nature is finite, right? There are only at any given moment a finite number of atoms in creation, a finite number of species in creation, a finite number of lives in creation. And so he says, how do you have something like the infinite express itself through something that is finite? And therefore, it needs to change. Therefore, nature has to have these cycles of birth, sustenance, and death. You have to peacefully put to rest, certain things in order to make an expression of newer, fresher things. Because that infinite spirit is trying as best possible to express its infinite nuances and creativity and possibilities, but through the finite medium of nature.
Ooh, that's deep. That's good. I love that. Spirit, nature, and for all of you that are watching and listening right now, there is so much wisdom in what Hitendra has shared up to this point. And I fully realize that sometimes it takes repetition and time to be able to process information that we're receiving so we can allow it space to land and that we can begin to better understand it and incorporate it in what we do in our daily lives. So I would encourage you, you see me, for those that are actually watching right now, you see me taking notes, right? I take a lot of notes. And I'm doing that because not only am I listening, I'm learning, and I want to be able to commit this information to memory so I can actually apply it. And so for all of you, I would encourage you to go back, re-listen to key moments of this interview, and take your own notes. What is connecting with you? What is something that you can take away from this conversation that is meaningful, that you can then apply in your own life? And if it's a business, apply in your own business. So please take time to do that. I think you'll find tremendous value when you incorporate that as part of your daily learnings and your daily process. So, Hitendra, obviously, we're going to encourage everyone to purchase a copy of Inner Mastery, Outer Impact. It is an excellent book. I actually purchased it on Audible, and I did that for two reasons. Number one, I spend a lot of time mobile, out and about, so I wanted to be able to listen to the book, but also you narrate it, so I wanted to hear it in your own voice. You brought this book to life. It is your creation, and I wanted to hear the way that you expressed your own thoughts and your own words and the lessons, some of the ancient lessons and wisdom that you're sharing with us through this book as well. So for everybody else, it's available on Audible. Make sure that you also buy a hard copy of the book too. It is so good. But what I would love to do, and we can't go into the details specifically, but there's an area that I want to touch on. Could you at least talk us through the 5 core energies? And then I'm going to tie that to something current and relevant, and I'd love to get your response on that. But let's start with the 5 core energies.
Yeah, no, thank you. I have been striving to create a simple, authentic, and practical approach to developing our leadership capacities. And I have found it very helpful to focus not as much on training people on behavior on the outside, but on the cultivation of these energies from the inside. It started with this class at Columbia, and since through our Mentora Institute that I founded while I've been teaching at Columbia, we've been doing this work now with corporations as well, typically mid to large size organizations, and helping develop leadership at the very top in the C-suite, all the way to the first-time managers or individual contributors. And this model that you're asking about, the 5 core energies, I find it very universally applicable to any or all of those context, right? And so what this says is that when you walk into a room, when you walk into a decision-making context, when you walk into a relationship, the energy you bring to it has a lot to do with how you'll show up, what behavior you'll engage in, what you will experience in that moment yourself, the tone of voice, facial expressions, any or all of that. And if you bring the right energy, then you'll be guided towards the right things to say and the right things to do, depending on what's happening there. So let's not focus as much on prescripted, rigid guidance on like, hey, if this person says this, then do this. If it's a difficult conversation, then do that, which is traditionally how we've been teaching people to be leaders, but instead focus on just bringing the right energy. Now you might say, what does it mean, Hitendra, bring the right energy? And so I have these 5 energies that you and I can just work on and cultivate and become aware of and then strengthen and use, in our lives. The first is purpose. And purpose is having a clear, resolute view of sort of where you're trying to head, yourself or with your family or your community or your team or your organization or your nation, whatever it is. Where are you trying to head and why, right? What's the deeper why behind it? The goals are a part of purpose, but really goals are more the outer expression of the deeper inner why. And purpose is the deeper inner why. The goals evolve and change. If I have more resources, if things are moving faster because people are more receptive, I should scale up my goals. If this is actually a moment where people are very distracted, there are other priorities that are taking over, and my purpose may not get like the limelight it needs, then I may want to pause or slow down a little bit, because that's the reality of what's happening. So the goals keep changing, but the purpose stays the same. So it gives you a steadiness from within, an anchoring from within, and yet a certain agility and adaptability on the outside, purpose as an energy. The second is wisdom, and wisdom is about truth seeking. Wisdom is about recognizing that in all and every situation, you want to operate with a full, balanced, objective understanding of the situation. And emotions can sometimes get in the way, and limiting beliefs and mindsets or negative thoughts that are kind of just making you prematurely reject the sense of possibilities in a certain relationship or an individual, or quick rush to judgment, etc., can hold us back. And so how do you kind of cleanse, in a sense, your inner lens so that you're seeing things, as somebody said about Abraham Lincoln once, that he saw things through a perfect mental lens. That's the wisdom energy. Emotional mastery, shifting your mindset into more of a kind of a winner's can-do mindset, eliminating self-defeating beliefs, any or all of that are part of the wisdom energy. The third is what I call growth. And growth is a recognition that, you and I, we're always a work in progress. And there's always, a more sort of expansive sense of how much impact and engagement and inspiration and wisdom we can bring to life and to a situation. And we've never really fully arrived, regardless of how successful we've been, because every next day there's a lot of change and evolution in the universe. It might change the rules. It might, throw us a different kind of a curved ball, etc. So how do I stay ever vigilant and seek to bring upon, my life and draw upon from within, my highest capacities and faculties, which are only partially discovered by me, because every day gives me a chance to discover more and practice more and express more. And so that's the growth energy. The fourth is love, and love is a recognition, as Rumi would say, that love is like the bridge between you and everything, the connective tissue, the heart-based kind of sense that, we're all, in some game together. We're all unified. Your success is my success. Your joy is my joy. And how can we bring that not just to our family relationships, but really, in a sense, to every relationship, every interaction, at work and beyond. This notion that, I can stay in a state of deep connection with people, empathetic attunement, with others. That doesn't mean that I don't make the hard calls. Doesn't mean that I don't have the tough conversations. But, when I do those, I do them from a place of love. And then the fifth and final of these is self-realization. And self-realization as an energy is, in a sense, the invitation that we have towards going to the most still, the most calm, part, the very, very center of our being. And when we are there, you just feel this ineffable, but still very real. It's hard to express, it's hard to touch in a sensory way, but it's still very real. You feel this very real connection with something beyond yourself. Something like, in a sense, a portal, a connection to the universe. Something like a voice that speaks to you in not even, clothed in words or in a human kind of voice, but just a pull, a feeling, an instinct, a yearning, a certain stirring from within. So that's the human spirit at play. And self-realization is a commitment you take on to nurture that part of you, because when you do, you feel very whole from within. You feel loved from within. You feel joyful from within. You feel peaceful from within. And meanwhile, there might be the crash of breaking worlds around you, and that's okay, because you have everything that you need, and you're seeking the reassurance, the clarity, the comfort, the all of that. You're getting it from within. And so you show up, as a battle-worn leader, in the arena of life, just to serve, just to support, just to inspire, just to be doing the noble and right things. because your own personal hungers, which we all have, as human beings, we have our hungers, you're being able to feed them and meet them from that nourished like human spirit within. So those are the five energies: purpose, wisdom, growth, love, and self-realization.
So this is so powerful, and it reminds me of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where self-realization was at the last step, right at the top of the triangle. But then I believe, if I remember correctly, he either split that or added transcendence at the top. And you talk about transcendence as the destination in your book. And so just very briefly share with our audience what transcendence is and how that applies to the destination that we are moving toward on our journey.
No, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, Maslow is quite a powerful thinker, and like you said, in his the Maslow's pyramid, his hierarchy of needs, the one that is popularly understood at the very top of that was what he called self-actualization. Self-actualization, and self-actualization was the idea that, well, if I have like security, and if I have food and shelter and love in my life, then I'm free to, in a sense, tap into and uncover my full potential as an artist, as a scientist, as a business person, whatever it might be. And then he later on realized that, actually there's something beyond that too, which is, like you said, he called it self-transcendence. Self-transcendence means like transcending your own self. And he said that actually is the ultimate in human attainment, and the ultimate hunger in humanity. And he was very right about that. Self-realization actually is very, very much akin to that. Self-realization is very much akin to that because, Yogananda would say, when the I shall die, then shall I know who am I. And what does that mean? What that means is that we stay very confined in a individualized, separate sense of identity, partly based on the physical separation between myself and yourself, my body and your body, and where we are. And that, though, is not necessarily true of our spirit. We can feel very fused, very connected with people across distances, across time, across even the past and the present and the future. We can feel very connected at times to generations and people and all that at the level of the human spirit. And so transcendence is a recognition that your home, your core identity, is not the physical body, which keeps evolving and changing every day. I sometimes do a thought experiment in my head. It sounds macabre perhaps, but I just visualize that. What if somebody just came and just cut off one of my arms, and then instantly the next minute cut off my other arm? Now, physically, I would be extremely different from what I was just 2 seconds ago. But intuitively, as I think about it, do I feel like I've changed at all? Do I feel like I've changed at all? Just because of that instant little act of whatever happened to my body? I don't feel like I was changed at all. My essence would not change. That kind of thought experiment convinces me that my essence, my core identity, is something beyond just the ever-changing nature of my physical self. And so the mystics, across the ages, what they had essentially formulated were a few principles. A principle which said that behind all of creation lies a energy, a force. That force is from where all of us have emerged. It's a loving force. It's a omnipotent force. It's all powerful. It's an omniscient force. It knows everything. It's a ever-present force in every atom in creation. And we have emerged from that. And in some ways, the purpose of life is to discover our divine heritage, our divine birthright, is to discover that we, at our very core of our being, are in fact essentially a drop of that larger ocean. And when we dissolve back into that ocean, we reunite with our very source from where we have come. And therefore, in different world traditions, these hungering truth seekers who didn't want to wait for just having lived a virtuous life and then dying and then hoping that some heaven's doors will open up to them, they wanted heaven here and now. They wanted to find a way to experience tremendous joy, attunement, love in their human form through certain practices that would help them accelerate and lift up their consciousness. And whether it was walks in nature or certain forms of poetry or chanting or prayer or meditation, or just acts of just giving selflessly, loving selflessly. Through that, they were trying to expand their heart. They were trying to walk away from just purely human ego and attachments. They were trying to find a way to lift up their consciousness. And more they did that, the steps they took, they started to feel a certain lightness of being. They started to feel a certain eternal, timeless connection with all things in the universe, almost a capacity to transcend even just the cycle of birth, sustenance, and death, at a human life level. And at the minimum, a sense of daily intuitive guidance from within about how they're meant to live out the rest of their moments, of that day and of that month and of that life. And so that to me is transcendence, when you feel a deep sense of unity with everything in creation, when you walk intrepid through the daily challenges of life, feeling enclosed in a certain just loving, hug by the universe, being protected by the universe, seeking and striving to put aside your own sort of, human limitations, so to say, so you can more and more affirm and identify with and express the most pure and divine part of who we all are at the truest core of our being.
Hitendra, that is absolutely beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Thank you for that description and helping us gain a bit more clarity on that. And as we're close to wrapping up our conversation and thinking about these 5 core energies, my question to you, at the moment that we're recording this, the Israel-Hamas war continues to rage on. And without getting too specific, that we've certainly seen a growing number of protests on college campuses across America. Columbia University happens to be one of them and certainly has been in the news quite a bit here of late. So my question really is, how, in your mind and in your experience, how can we apply inner mastery in these most challenging of times? Showing up as a leader, showing up with love. What can we do as individuals to practice and apply inner mastery?
Yeah, I mean, see, Jay, this really obviously deeply pains me, and it pains you and every one of our listeners, I'm sure. In any time we see any suffering and strife in humanity, it, at the soul level, we all get affected. And you're right, Colombia itself has been, a center point of some of these in the last few days, and it's very hurtful to see what we're going through. Now, I've thought about it and I've written about it in recent months after the terrible tragedy of October 7th and what has transpired since. So I might, in fact, also turn our audience towards one of my blogs on this on my personal website, hitendra.com. There is under Insights, there is an article called 3 Faiths and 1 Lesson. 3 Faiths and 1 Lesson. And I talk there about the agony of trying to think about sort of what's the right position to take. And I realized that sitting here, millions of miles away, so to say, from what's transpiring there in Palestine and Israel, and the struggles and issues, going back in history, who am I to make like a real prescriptive claim that I know exactly what should be done if you are feeling tremendously threatened by, terrorism, or on the other side, you're facing, bombs upon bombs and all kinds of attacks. Who am I to make a claim that I know exactly what, should be done? What I can say, though, as a matter of principle, is that in anything and everything we do, what this teaching of the five core energies teaches me is that we should not lose our humanity. We should not lose our humanity. We lose our humanity when we take pain, or take joy in other people's pain. And so my litmus test to everybody who's engaged in any of this would be to ask themselves, am I making choices? Am I engaging in speaking and doing and acting from the calmest part of my being, from the most loving part of my being, from the part of my being where I have the noblest of intents? Or am I doing whatever I'm doing out of a sense of rage and vindictiveness, and like, I care a lot about this community and I don't care at all about that community? Because these kinds of things, they don't end up just distancing you from, a large sliver of humanity. They actually make us distance our own self from our own soul, from our own higher self, from our own better judgments. And painfully so, understandably so, but also painfully so, I find that it's very hard today to have conversations about this without people getting highly emotional and rushing to quick judgment about each other based on just the first few words that comes out from somebody's mouth, which reveals to them as to which side you're on, and et cetera, et cetera. So in this highly polarized world, it's just very painful to see. And my appeal and prayer for all of us would be to build these bridges of love. As Father Gregory Boyle, this beautiful, priest from a very gang-infested part of Los Angeles, who has helped to heal and transform many of these former gang members, come out of prison, etc., and want to really reform, and has seen some of these people sometimes relapse and commit a crime again and go back into, engage in an act of violence of some kind and go back into prison, and then come out again and then seek to go down the path of reform again. As he said once so beautifully, he said, God's work is slow work. So let us commit ourselves to whatever it is, the noble pursuit that we feel we are being called for, to be peacemakers, right, in and around us, in whatever platform, we have been given, whether it's just the dinner table conversation that we're having within our family or something larger in the community. Let us commit ourselves to being those peacemakers. Let us realize that, seeds have to be sown, the plant has to be watered, the soil has to be nourished, and then over time, the fruits will come to us. And I have no doubt, if you look at the arc of human history, that we are living in a much more blessed period than we were 60 years ago, and 100 years ago, and 200 years ago, and 500 years ago. Let us not feel that humanity in any way is in despair relative to where it was, roughly speaking, in decades and centuries past. It's a game of inches, step by step, that we can take, month upon month, year upon year. We can do our part within the community that we belong to, but just remember this one acid test. Do everything from the very depths of your being, from the calmest regions within you, not from a sense of emotional uprising or from taking joy in other people's pain.
Well said, Hitendra. And on that note, I want to thank you so very much for joining us today on Business Minds Coffee Chat. What an extraordinary individual you are. What an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, bringing your thoughts, your book to life, and just helping to educate all of us and enlighten us. I'm grateful for you, and I thank you so very much.
Yeah, what's obvious to me, Jay, from this conversation is that it could have been, such a rich and rewarding conversation just to reverse our roles, just to have you share your journey and your wisdom and your spirit, which has been, revealed even just through the line of conversation and questions that you've engaged in. And so I'm grateful to you and the beautiful work that you're doing for our world, and cheer you on and cheer our listeners on as well in manifesting. Yeah, just works and paths of great beauty in everything you do. So thank you.
Thank you. And for all of you, thank you so very much for tuning in and listening and watching. My gosh, what an incredible conversation today. And I do have a quick favor to ask. Would you please take just a moment and leave us a review and a comment on Apple Podcast? We would love that. That would help us expand our reach and attract incredible guests just like our guest today. I mean, what an amazing conversation. My mind is actually blown. So to enjoy more episodes, all you need to do is visit jscherbusinessconsulting.com, click that podcast button, and until next time, keep learning, keep growing. Make sure that you go out and pick up a copy of Inner Mastery, Outer Impact, and we'll see you on the next Business Minds Coffee Chat. Take care, everybody.